All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're going to tackle a real cornerstone of any neurological assessment, the motor system exam. We're going to break this whole complex process down into clear, simple steps and show you exactly how clinicians can learn to read the body's movements to understand what's going on in the brain. So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through the 6 exact steps that clinicians use to build a complete picture of a patient's motor function. We'll start with something as simple as just looking, and we'll end by putting all the clues together to solve the puzzle. You know, the exam actually starts before a single touch. It's pretty amazing, really. A surprising number of clues about the nervous system are just visible, right there for you to see. This first look really sets the stage for everything else that's going to follow. So what are they actually looking for? Well, pretty much everything. We're talking about posture, any asymmetry between the left and right sides of the body. Are there any signs of muscle wasting? Because that could hint at a nerve problem. Or maybe there are involuntary movements, like a tremor or a tic. Even something as simple as a surgical scar or seeing a patient uses a walking cane, every single thing adds another piece to the puzzle. Okay, next up, we're moving on to 2 concepts that are different, but definitely related: muscle tone and power. So tone is the muscle's background tension when it's just completely at rest. Power, on the other hand, is the active strength a patient can generate when they actually try to move. And how these two are tested is really the key here. To check out the tone, the clinician passively moves the patient's limbs just to feel for any underlying resistance. But to test power, the patient has to actively move against the clinician's resistance. See the difference? One's passive, the other is active. Let's really focus on tone for a second. It's that subtle resistance you feel when you move a totally relaxed arm or leg. And when it's abnormal, man, it tells a story. A floppy limb? That suggests something we call hypotonia. A stiff, really resistant limb points towards spasticity. And in some cases, you feel this lead pipe rigidity that's just constant and unyielding. So let's say a muscle feels weak when we test it. That's just a feeling, right? It's subjective. How can we turn that feeling into an objective, universal measurement that any doctor, anywhere in the world, can understand? And here is the solution: the Medical Research Council, or MRC, scale. It's a super simple 0 to 5 grading system. 0 means absolutely no muscle contraction at all, and a 5 represents full, totally normal power. This scale is absolutely essential for documenting weakness in a way everyone understands and for tracking any changes over time. Now, before we move on, we have to talk about the single most important principle of this entire exam, the golden rule. Always, always compare the left side to the right. A really subtle weakness can be so easily missed unless you directly contrast it with the strength of the opposite limb. It's a game changer. All right, next up is coordination. Now, this isn't about raw strength anymore. This is all about the brain's ability to act like a conductor, orchestrating these smooth, fluid, and accurate movements. We're really testing the function of a part of the brain called the cerebellum here. And we test this with some pretty classic maneuvers. For the arms, we use the finger-nose-finger test, where the patient touches their own nose, then the examiner's finger, back and forth. For the legs, there's the heel-to-shin test. We also look at rapid alternating movements, like quickly flipping your hands over and back on your lap. Now, during these tests, what we're really looking for are specific kinds of errors. One of the most important is something called dysmetria, which is basically an inability to judge distance. The patient might consistently overshoot the target, or maybe they undershoot it. Either way, it's a classic sign that the cerebellum isn't working quite right. Let's move on to reflexes. Think of these as a direct, totally unfiltered window into the body's nerve circuits. Because they're involuntary, they give us a pure look at the spinal cord's connection to the muscle, completely bypassing any conscious thought or effort. It's pretty cool. So we check 2 main types. First, you've got the deep tendon reflexes. These are the normal ones we all have, like that classic knee jerk or the biceps reflex. But second, we check for what are called pathological reflexes, and these are abnormal reflexes that should not be there in a healthy adult. And just like we did with muscle power, we grade reflexes on a scale, this time from 0 to 4. A grade of 2 is perfectly normal, that's the sweet spot. A 0 means the reflex is totally absent, while a 3 tells us it's way more active than it should be. A 4 is even more so, and you often see something called clonus, these rhythmic, involuntary muscle beats. Either extreme is a really significant clue. And this brings us to what is maybe the most famous pathological reflex in all of neurology, the Babinski sign. Okay, so in an adult, when you stroke the bottom of the foot, the toes should curl down, right? Well, if the big toe goes up instead, that is a big deal. It's a powerful indicator of a problem in the central nervous system, meaning the brain or the spinal cord. Now for our final piece of the examination, gait. Just watching a patient walk is an incredibly powerful diagnostic test. And you might be asking, why? Well, because walking is the ultimate integration of everything we've tested so far. Tone, power, coordination, and balance, all of it has to work together perfectly in one complex action. And we look at very specific things. Does the patient swing their arms naturally? How wide is their stance? Is it broad-based? Is their posture stooped over, or is it upright? We also challenge them with things like tandem walking. That's walking heel to toe in a perfectly straight line, kind of like you're on a tightrope. You see, specific problems create these recognizable walking patterns. For instance, an ataxic gait is really wide and unsteady, almost making the person look like they're intoxicated. A Parkinsonian gait is known for its small, shuffling steps. And a hemiplegic gait, which you often see after a stroke, involves swinging one leg around in a stiff arc. Okay, so we've gathered all these individual findings, from inspection, tone, power, reflexes, and gait. Now for the big question. How do we put all these clues together into a meaningful pattern that actually tells us where the problem is? This right here, this is where it all comes together. We can see two major patterns. An upper motor neuron, or UMN, problem, that means it's in the brain or spinal cord, typically causes increased tone and increased reflexes. But a lower motor neuron, or LMN problem, which affects the nerves after they leave the spinal cord, causes the exact opposite: decreased tone, decreased reflexes, and you often see muscle wasting and these tiny visible muscle twitches called fasciculations. Recognizing these two opposing patterns is really the art of neurology. And this really hammers home our main theme. It is almost never one single finding that gives you the answer. It is the collective pattern of signs, how the tone, power, and reflexes all fit together, that lets a clinician confidently pinpoint where in the huge, complex nervous system the issue actually is. So to wrap this all up, if you remember nothing else, remember these three things. First, be systematic. Follow the steps from inspection all the way to gait. Second, never ever forget to compare one side to the other. And third, always be looking for that overall pattern that tells the real story. So this exam is incredibly powerful. It's fantastic at telling us where a neurological problem is located, but it leaves us with one final huge question. It can't always tell us why it's happening. And answering that why requires the next step in the diagnostic journey, things like medical imaging or lab tests to find the real root cause.